Hello friends, welcome to your channel, the Night Storyteller channel. If you are interested in our stories, please check our channel. My father, these were 3 brothers, one of whom was a stepbrother, and the second husband's son was my great-grandmother. When he was young, a heavy object hit his head in the company where he worked, and he suffered a concussion and died. After 1 year, my grandmother was very upset about her husband's death and felt very lonely, but Zamune came to her aid and put her old love on her way. Muhammad Ali has also lost his wife for a couple of years. These two are in love. Because of the conflicts between their families, they did not get along after many years and they got married. The result of their marriage is Shahab, our step-uncle, who is 10 or 12 years older than my father. Our step-grandfather Muhammad Ali, we used to gather at his house for any reason and have a good time. That's why our family was very close and almost all of us had a good relationship. He got married late because he wanted to pay attention to Muhammad Ali so that he wouldn't become a stepfather to my father. Because of this, even though he was known for his beauty, height, and figure, and he had made a lot of money for himself and girls were dying for him, he had that initial passion for her. He loses his marriage and is forced to marry her, and my great-grandmother marries the wrong girl for her son, which has been going on since my mother's time, Uncle Mustafa's concubine, and also later when Shadi became Uncle Shahab's wife. Both of them are from an urban and educated family. They are relatively wealthy, but my mother, not my father, Mortiza, when he and his friend go to a recreational village for fun, he sees my mother, who is a village girl, and he falls in love with her with all his heart, not 100 hearts. So much so that he puts everything on his shoes and makes his family happy. It is related to this. My great-grandmother also likes Sarah very much in the few times she sees her, and finally my parents get married. My mother was also a very beautiful girl, even though she was from the south, but her face was like Europeans, and she won the hearts of everyone. With those big blue eyes and light curly hair, my mother had other good suitors besides my father, but she was also attracted by my father's charms and finally said yes to him, even though my mother was both from her motives, divorce, and morals. He was the best, and even though he lived in the village, he had a good financial situation, but because he was a villager and had a diploma, he was always ridiculed by Uncle Mustafa's wife, and he was constantly under attack and sarcasm from them. Even though my mother was my grandmother's favorite bride, but those days, even though my mother tried to communicate with them, it always made my mother feel isolated and alone in our family. I hated those 2 women, that's why. They always considered themselves higher than our family, and it was as if they had fallen from the elephant's nose in the event that they had no superiority, even though they had a bachelor's degree, but they were unemployed and busy themselves with useless work. But my mother is a woman despite being less educated. She was very active and kind, and she was always in the community and had many friends. Everyone in my family, from my grandmother and my uncle to my distant relatives, had special respect for my mother, especially because of the charitable activities she did, and the same is true of many of her uncles. It made me more nervous, and I was complaining about it. Everything was going very smoothly, and as always, when suddenly we received an unexpected news, and it put us in a huge shock. He used to go to neighboring countries and usually return in 7 or 8 days, but this time his trip was too long. One of my father's friends informed us that my father got a wife there, and now he has no intention of returning to Iran. We fell into something as if we had received the news of my father's death. I even remember that I heard Uncle Mustafa say that if the news of his death came, we would be less ashamed of your mother. None of us could believe it. We were all sure that my father loved my mother, and so on. It was impossible that this happened. Even my brother Parsa and I could not accept that our father had done such a thing because these 2 men and women had no differences and agreed on everything. We had never seen these 2 fight. It was strange for them to raise their voices to each other. It is even more strange that after hearing this news, my mother did not show any reaction and asked us not to talk about this matter at all, neither with her nor with anyone else. Come and tell the truth. 6 months passed like this, and we lived without hearing about our father, and even knowing what would happen at the end of this story. It's just that these Amman women didn't shut their mouths in this situation and didn't stop gossiping and lashing out. Unfortunately, in our family, if you gave an older answer, they would treat you very badly, and respecting your elders was one of the most important things. My mother never allowed me to answer those two women who made me endlessly jealous, but one of those nights when we returned from a party at my grandmother's house, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw my mother crying for 1,000 years in her room. That night, because my grandmother was having fun. His other guests were his uncle's wife. They looked away, and it was as if they had said something to her that was beyond my mother's control. My patience was so full that the next day I went away from my mother's sight. The retribution for all those years and the disrespect I gave them was very little, but it really cooled my heart. I did the same thing. No one believed them, and Parisa said that she would not make such a mistake at all and only belittle themselves. 6 months later, when my father returned, unfortunately, he was not alone, and my new wife had brought my father with her to Iran. His personality had changed, and it was as if he had become a different person, and not only did his mother no longer have a place in his heart, but we children were like strangers to him. He said very cruelly that he wanted to bring his wife here and live with us, in my opinion at that time. The only thing that could have been the answer to all the changes my father made was that he had been electrocuted and turned into a different person. I was staring at my dad, but Parsa couldn't take it anymore and suddenly attacked him and got into trouble with him until my mom yelled at him. He put all his belongings in a suitcase and ignored my pleas, and Parsa left that house forever, and after some time he separated from my father after their divorce. My mother rented a small house in the lower part of the city with the little savings she had. But because it was small, the house didn't let me and last year go to live with him. We hated our father and couldn't bear it even for a moment. So we went to my grandmother. And rejecting both my fathers due to the disintegration of our family, our parties gradually became less and less to the point where we rarely saw each other. It wasn't long after my mom and dad's divorce that we found out that Uncle Mustafa's wife, Sahar, was diagnosed with cancer and she had a doctorate. Losing hope again caused chaos in the family, and everyone was upset because of this. But I was not in my hands, and I had a deep happiness in my heart, and I was sure that because of his unfaithful wickedness, God will leave his work unfinished in this world, because Ammon's wife was paralyzed and their son was also a soldier, and both of them were alone. My grandmother would cook food for them most of the time, and she would give me and Parsa to take food for both Ammon's wife and Uncle Mustafa. In a Shiraz cell, I saw my old man on the street and I lost track of time, and I arrived almost an hour late. When I got there, the general store was empty and I did not find the general store. I guessed that he had gone to the store to get things from his storage, but when I entered there, I saw my mom, who was lying on the sofa in the lap of the public, and Uncle Mustafa's face was on his face at first, but he turned away from my mom when he saw me. My brain whistled until a word came out of the public's mouth. I threw the food dish on the floor and ran out of there until I got home. I sat by the table several times to digest what I had seen. I arrived home a few hours later. That's why I realized that my mom did such a thing. Of course, I gave my mom the right to want to take revenge on my father and the public woman like this, but you were the one I had made of her, and she broke after seeing that scene at home when she saw her uncle. I was surprised by Mustafa and my mom. I thought that after that, moms would lose themselves in public, but they were both very relaxed and happy sitting together. And my older mom started laughing when she saw me and explained to me that my uncle asked my mom to go to his shop and show him the clothes I prepared for charity so that my mom can check them and give them to someone who really needs them. My grandmother knew about this. But because my uncle had a lot of customers that day and he was busy, my mom had gone to see all those things. She lost her balance and fell on the floor. She freaked out, and when she saw my mom in that situation, she called the emergency room. My mom is not afraid. She brings him to the couch, and it happens that I see these two in each other's arms because of the character I knew from these two and the words of my grandmother who never lied. I believed this story, and I thanked God very much that my mom told me about it. Adultery is not bad. My uncle's wife could not fight her illness for more than 3 months, and she died very soon, but a few days before her death, She made a horrible confession to my mother and said that she was the reason for Mortize's betrayal of her, and she was able to do it with 1,000 tricks and tricks. Within a year, through one of his friends, he stole my father's name and forced him to cheat, and that he was very jealous of my mother, and all that teasing was because of my sore tongue, and then he asked my mother for forgiveness. It's ridiculous all these years. My mom's liver was bleeding and now it's gone. It was in the past and he had no other choice but to ask my mom to forgive him. Of course, if this disease did not come to him, he would have continued his bad behavior now. But as I expected, my mom will forgive him now if I want to, after these events, from our current situation. Let me tell you that my mom is married to Uncle Mustafa, and more importantly, they had an affair with each other before Sahar's death, and worst of all, that bad scene I saw of them in the warehouse was real. And these two were busy doing bad things far from being in everyone's eyes, and worse than all of this. My grandmother lied to me with all the trust one had in her, and she acquitted herself by saying that it was expedient. And it happened that my trust towards all people was taken away, as if the public from the first time he sees my mom, he falls in love with her. But because of the current circumstances, he closes his eyes to her love, and later, when his circumstances clear up, he proposes to her. But the interesting thing is that the well that the Ammon woman had made for my mother and had brought me success was much smaller than the well that she got herself into, and she didn't know that she shouldn't be quick to take advantage of someone. Not only herself, but my poor father. He was miserable. It was clear that he was not warm to his new wife, and they separated very soon, and when he wanted to return to my mother, he found that she had married his brother, and this news made my father very angry, and then he left Iran forever.